That is pretty cool. They did a good job. Actually, they were looking for me for like 30 minutes, and they had some other Chris Mayfield picture. It's quite embarrassing. Had glasses and a plaid shirt, and like, I'm just glad that I showed up here on my own. But I'm really excited to talk to you guys about deploying human-centered design into your practices. We're really going to go over a framework. We're going to go over a couple things that hopefully each of you can take back to your teams and use. When I was about 11 years old, I grew up in California on the coast, and like beautiful, mild climate. It was gorgeous. And my family, they weren't very well off, and they saved up to buy me a bike. It wasn't this bike, but it was one kind of like this. And I was a really curious kid, and I was looking at that brand new bike that I had for my birthday, and I saw some silver little balls in the back inside of the sprocket. And of course, I got to see what that is. So I go and grab a flathead screwdriver, because I got to have a tool, and I started taking all of the balls out. I thought maybe they shouldn't be there. And anyway, it turns out those are ball bearings, and my dad, he wasn't very mad, which really surprised me. I guess he knew that I was a pretty curious kid, and I just take it apart anyway. But I've always really loved tools, and I have always really loved being curious about how are things made and how are things built. And when I was about 14 years old, I don't know if you guys know the Boy Scouts, but I was in the Boy Scouts of America, and we had these things called merit badges. One of the merit badges was engineering. And I remember going to this session, and I learned about architecture, and I learned about how the Golden Gate Bridge was built. Just by show of hands, how many people have been to the Golden Gate Bridge here? Dang, like 35%, I'd say, 30% maybe. That's a lot of people. That just is a testament to how amazing this structure is. Well, I can remember, going out for the first time and actually touching the bolts, which were about the size of my hand, and some of the cables I could barely put my arms around, and I was just in awe of this structure. But when you think about it, it's just a tool. It's just a tool to get from one side to the other side. But when you think about how effective a tool it is, it's quite amazing. Being able to have about 2.25 billion vehicles in about 78 years or so to service it, that's kind of amazing. But if you think about it a little bit deeper, it's actually a lot more than a tool. It's actually a symbol. It's a symbol of accomplishment. And these things that we build as a people, we've always built tools. We've always built things for as long as we can remember. And they represent who we are. They represent how we move about. Wilson Miner, this really well-known designer at Facebook, made this connection that when you think about a car is a tool that somebody built. But that tool ended up completely shaping our entire landscape around us, like this picture here. And Wilson Miner also quoted this guy, Marshall McLuhan, who's a really well-known guy from the 60s, who said, "We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us." So if you think about it for just a minute and stop thinking about everything else and the code that we have to think about, and just pause on this moment, what I love with what we do in this room is we are now the builders of the next generation. We get to shape what our culture is like by the tools and by the products and services that we build. When every single company that you guys are working for are probably going through some type of digital transformation. That's what's going on, that catchword. And because of that, we're the people who get to build. And with that comes a great responsibility. And this keeps me up at night all the time. How do we eliminate the bias that every one of us has and create a better future, a better way for us to create? And that brings me to tools again, because we get to shape the tools that we get to use to influence our teams to reduce that bias. So before I go a little bit further, I want to talk a little bit about, just a little bit of context about who I am. I work at Pluralsight. If you haven't heard of them, we're a technology learning platform, and we're passionate about democratizing tech skills. That's why we exist. For my particular role, I'm a VP of product, so I work with engineers, designers, product managers every single day, and my particular focus is on all of the AI and machine learning parts of our product. So I'm going to go over a couple of things. Why human-centered, just one more click inside of that, and then 3 different ways that you can deploy human-centered, and then finally just some next steps. So to get started, why human-centered? When I think about all of those companies out there that are truly causing change, that are changing the type of products that we use, you'll find in most of them some form of human-centered design at their core. Two good examples, well, third if you put Spotify in there. Airbnb, think about the way they built that product and the way that it's completely changing the industry. And the same thing with Uber. Now, this has also caused this kind of war on talent, I guess if you want to use that term, where these tech skills are so pivotal now with the way that we make human-centered design products. So that brings to my mind as a leader trying to create products, how do we attract and retain those important skills? And how do we keep our team engaged? And finally, how do we empower those teams to then create this better future? So to address some of those, human-centered design really is a great way to address those problems. So 3 moves, I'm going to give you 3 simple moves to deploy human-centered design into your teams or as an individual, however you work. And the first one really is you have to discover the current state. But you can't just assume that you know the practices of your teams, you know the type of, are you agile, are you waterfall, are you agile fall? I don't know. There's so many different ways that we all work right now. So you have to use human-centered design to actually discover where you currently are. Interesting, these 3 moves are interesting because it's like a human-centered sandwich. So the center point you'll notice, really you use for the first and the third. So I'll kind of go over that. So just as a starter kit, here's 4 questions, or things you got to go and ask, who your customers are. It sounds so simple, but when we first arrived at Pluralsight a couple years ago, nobody really knew exactly who the different customers were. We had to discover that together as a team. And you have to figure out what are the core problems that your customers are having, and what is the delivery cadence? Are you deploying every single day? Do you have continuous deployment? Do you stockpile everything up and do big, huge releases once a year? What is it? You need to figure out where you are so that you know how to move forward. So that leads you to core big ideas. And what I mean by core big ideas is these are things that are just human, they're ingrained in you, things that will never, ever change. If you can take your product and go up 3 or 4 layers and think, what core human thing is this solving? To give you an example, Jeff Bezos said, people 10 years from now are not going to come to me and say, Jeff, I don't want products to be delivered to me so fast. Slow it down, please. His core 3 big ideas are, fast delivery, and just really simple, fast delivery and vast selection and cheap prices. Not going to change. Probably not for me, probably not for you. So that's what I'm talking about. And the more you want to create this team unity that we're talking about, you want to align that to your mission, this is going to build a lot of that reason to stay and a lot of that reason to attract new talent. And yeah, maybe your product sucks. Yours doesn't suck, but other people's products probably suck. So number 2 is the scalable framework, and this is the meat. This is the middle of the human-centered sandwich here. This is the part that really you're going to be able to take away and assess where you currently are and things you can do differently. In a nutshell, this is basically what it looks like. I'll go over the acronym, sorry for those TLAs. But what we use at Pluralsight is called Directed Discovery. Our Chief Experience Officer, Nate Walkingshaw, created Directed Discovery and has been trying it out at several different companies. And now at Pluralsight, we've used it at scale for over 30-plus teams and in several different areas of the product. So I'm not going to talk about corporate strategy, and I'm not going to talk about headlights, taillights, happiness, but what that means is headlights is like your usage, how's it coming at you? Taillights is your billings, of course, and happiness is however you measure if people like your product. We use NPS. So I'm not going to talk about that. But you'll notice that on the left side, it's more qualitative. So these are things where you're really saving money by not building something, and instead you're just discovering with your customers what their problems and needs are. And then as you go to the right, it gets more qualitative and more finite. So I'm going to go over each one of these. And starting with personas, how many of you have used personas before? Right. So hopefully you're not ready to throw me off stage. I'm not talking about the negative demographic marketing version of personas. To be clear, this is all about clustering those main jobs that people are trying to get done that you care about. So for us, it's easy for us to group that in 4 different key clusters of people who are trying to do different things. And to give you, to zoom in one more step, I'll walk you through one of our versions of a learner. So this is a newbie, and if you look up there to the top side here, this is an overarching goal, and that goal really helps all of the different things that she's trying to do. Now, what's interesting is when you think of learn by doing, just in time, access to learning, learn by watching, those are actually all product teams. And what keeps all those product teams together and keeps things from looking like a big mess is that overarching human-centered outcome. So to go into those different gates, that's personas. What voice of customer means, that's VOC. Think about all of the tools that you have access to in human-centered design that help you discover the customer. We use things like writing out a discussion guide that removes bias from questions. That's really hard to do. You're never going to do 100%, but you remove as much as you can. We use things like journey mapping, where you're really trying to discover what people are doing outside of your product. Those all fit in that voice of customer bucket. And for customer preference testing, that's once you've identified what the needs are, then you need to build something very lean, very small to be able to see if you understood the needs. So that's all of the tools you can think of. Your prototyping, we use things like Envision, Principle, those type front-end prototypes as well. Wizard of Oz type prototypes, I don't know if you've heard that or not, but when you're doing machine learning or AI, you really need to kind of fake some of those interactions. That's your customer preference test. And then finally, your CCT, we call customer confirmation testing. Now, the reason we've divided this up into 3 really simple gates, and we've put a couple of acronyms with this framework, is this actually makes it pretty easy for everyone to understand. As an example, our human resources department last year went through and kind of did an overhaul as we've really grown lately. And they used, on their own, directed discovery. They used the names. They used CPT, CCT, and VOC to be able to discover what should we do with our newer plan. So this is a good way for you to be able to spread that throughout the entire company. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, cool, but where do I start? And this really simple little decision tree helps you understand that this isn't linear. You don't always start, not everything goes through VOC. It just depends on what you're making. And if you really simplify it to, is this an innovation? Have we never done this before? Is this a new technology? Is this a new problem? Or is this just a +1? We already have a start, and we just need to add a little something to it. Or is this operational excellence? That algorithm takes a second. We got to fix that. And that really helps you understand where you can start and reduces so much confusion on your teams. And as you can see, the whole thing is iterating. Now, you may have different types of release cycles. The way that we do it is pre-alpha is just internal customers. It's a percentage. And then we go to alpha, beta, and then general release. What's a little different that I haven't seen in other companies as common is we use this 80% confidence. So we're measuring every single step of the way, and we have internal benchmarks that we set. So you need to get 4.0 or higher out of 5 in order to really feel confident to go on to the next step. And if you're not there, you go back through and you look at the feedback and you iterate until you are there. And that really helps us make sure that we release in a good way. Now, it's really key to point out that this is, again, leveraging those team members. That's your hidden gem there. That's your superpower. And that is going together. This isn't about a product manager alone or a UX designer or a top-down approach. You need to take the team who's going to make it with you. As an example, voice of customers usually look like this for us. It's very effective to use apps that do video conferencing and you can share prototypes. Synthesis sometimes is really complicated. Most of the time we're using digital tools, but sometimes it's really good to get out of that digital environment, bring the team together, and start pasting things together. These are transcripts from some work we were doing with Skill IQ. The reason to bring this one up is what's interesting is you have in this room a chief technology officer, a person from content, two completely separate product teams, myself is in there, and also somebody from product marketing. And everyone is there at the same level with no titles, and we're all working together to understand a journey. And this is what we want it to look like as often as we possibly can. The end result, this is more in the VOC stage, is really trying to figure out what is the journey that people are on, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, and what are they doing, and don't really think about your own product. And then from here, you can lay the framework of human-centered design for several quarters. Prototype testing, this should be common. And really what this creates among your team is this customer sessions. To give you a good baseline, what we end up doing is about 5+ interviews per team. And if you look at how many teams we have, that's about 30 product teams in a given year. That's about 8,000 interviews with customers. So when you think about all of the things you have to do to figure out what should I do next and is this going to be valuable, when every single one of your teams has that much interaction directly with one-to-one with the customers, it really removes a lot of that time you spend planning and time you spend documenting and time you spend talking to that chief technology officer about why you're building something, because remember, he was there. Not all the time, but there's going to be problems. You're going to run into a few things. There's going to be some kinks, and I just want to point out 2, maybe 3 common things that I've seen as teams try to learn this new process of directed discovery. The one that's really common is I don't feel like I have enough time to code, and the thing that I've noticed is to just acknowledge that it's okay. And I'll cover this in a minute, but if you do parallel directed discovery and delivery, that really helps solve that problem. The other one I hear a lot is that it's mentally straining. You're taking the smartest people in your company, your developers and your engineers, and they're actually getting a little exhausted talking to people all day. And that kind of goes away, and it's not common for you to do that much directed discovery. It's more of an upfront cost. And finally, this one doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes people resist a little bit, saying, well, I already have Agile, or I have my Scrum teams, or we already have certain tools. Sometimes people don't know, well, is this tool a part of this process or not? And the point is, you have a very clear framework that you can put all of the tools that are helpful to you and to your business model inside of those different areas to reduce confusion. So the final one is really teamwork and practice, and I can't stress this enough. It isn't enough to just introduce something new or a new version of human-centered design. You really have to wrap your org and your support for these type of practices around this. So, I mean, we know it's all about teams, but we don't always put our organization around it. So what we have found works really, really well is co-located, cross-functional, autonomous teams. We do have a small remote team, pocket of remote team, and so we're not going to do this 100% of the time. But wherever possible, having co-location, autonomous teams is really the key to getting really good, effective human-centered design. And for us, a team used to look like a product manager, a UX designer, and a development leader. And of course, you'd have 4 to 6 engineers as well, but the core team would just be those 3 disciplines. But as we've grown and as technology has changed, we also have put in there data science, machine learning sometimes, content because of the type of business model that we have, and even data engineering. And so what I mean by that is, anytime you're doing discovery work, you have to have one of those disciplines represented. I've a couple of times canceled user sessions because I didn't have an engineer with me. We want to make sure that we empower all of the engineers on the team to make product decisions. So again, to this point that empathy ends up being the end result. And the beautiful thing that I've seen is your teams actually begin to become better people as they practice empathy for the people that you serve. And so they actually can kind of come together and realize that people are way more important than the projects that they're on. So that your secret sauce ends up being that continuous discovery and that continuous delivery. A little trick, we just take one person out of each of those disciplines and we rotate them in so that you don't overwhelm your engineers or overwhelm your content disciplines, just to keep it simple. So for us, just a little bit of proof in the pudding. When we go out and hire, we can always do better, but it ends up showing up in our results with high win rates, low attrition, and internal NPS of a pretty good number. So the final thing here is really, you can't focus on outputs if you're going to be focused on human-centered design. And really, to make that a little bit more clear, when you think about, I'll give you a use case of something that happened to us. We were trying to close a skills gap and then measure progress toward closing that skills gap. This is one of our outcomes. And what we found is this is going to cause several teams to work together, and it's also going to cause us to think about several different personas. So it's a pretty common, really good use case. So what we ended up creating just to give you an example of one persona, is we ended up creating a new way after somebody measures their skill. We give them a really specific recommendation to help them with the gap that they had in that skill. This is an output. Congratulations, good job, you made an output. It's not the outcome. This is just they made something. Now, for the leader, we had a set of tools. They're worried about, how do I make sure I have enough talent and enough skills to be able to accomplish this objective I have? And so we have a dashboard here, and they can see how the Karas and the other learners of the world, in aggregate form, are improving their skill. Now, this is more of an outcome for the learner. You can start to see how that connects together. But in the end, it's really just an output. You made a screen. Congratulations. This gets closer to an outcome, one side of the outcome. These are shared posts of users on LinkedIn, social out there, and they're saying, like, hey, I've improved my skill. I've just measured my skill. And we didn't tell them to do this. This ends up being more of the outcome. And this is also an outcome. We have a partnership with Stack Overflow, so they can share their skills. And they created a discussion, and you can see a lot of these are negative in our first version, our first iteration. Some are positive, and some of those were negative. And our team had a lot to say about those negatives, and they jumped right in and started to address that problem. So this is more of an outcome. So again, taking that step from an output to an outcome is another key part. So to sum it up, really trying to reach that overall outcome is going to help pull all of this together, and making sure that you align your teams to your mission and to your vision. That's going to give you a lot of transparency on those people who are excited about your mission. And discovering more about your process and where you currently are, obsessing about that customer through directed discovery, and then moving from outputs to outcomes is really going to help be the glue to keep all of that together. There are some resources. What I like about directed discovery is Nate has really done a good job in collecting it together. Now, you can use that as an example, and if you already have a framework at your company, then just take the things that work with you and don't take the things that don't work for you. All I'd ask is just try it on a little bit, see what works. But there's a couple of Medium articles, and there's also a Slack channel that you can go and join in and ask questions to. So please visit us if you have any questions. We have a booth at booth 1 on the first floor, and you can take a skill IQ there. You can also get a free 60-day subscription if you'd like to try Pluralsight out, and if you just complete the survey. And thank you very much.
Perfectly on time. Thank you, Chris, for that. So it's 12 seconds left.
12.
Wow. Thank you so much. So we have some questions here. I encourage you to use Slido as the presenters speak. So these are the clever guys. Ask the questions. They can answer them. So the first question is, how frequently do you update and change your personas?
That is a great question. So on personas, with that continuous discovery that I mentioned, we have a tool that we've created ourselves. It's called Carbon. And that tool is really the central place for all of the research coming together. So you can search it, you can type in tags. It uses NLP to kind of match it all together. And that helps us expose the changes in the persona. In the beginning of every single interview, we kind of do a mini persona check. So I would say there's a little bit of ongoing, and then we look at it more formally once a year. We kind of make sure that we're okay.
All right.
Good question.
Next question is, what's the best method for discovering the current state?
Maybe, could they clarify, discover the current state? For us, discovering the current state, I'm just going to assume that you're thinking about your company and the current state of your personas. It's really good to just start small and to see with a small product team, that's the easiest way, and to just ask questions about what the business model is and what the problems are that you're solving, and then it'll grow from there. That's what I've seen to be the most effective.
Yeah, it's quite often that you never assess the as-is status just for, you go to the to-be, or where should we be?
Yeah. I mean, data obviously is going to be a good way to see your usage and to see your patterns. That's going to be a really good tool.
Right. The next question is on the invisible users. So how do you work with customers that don't have an actual user, only contracted work, where they never see or talk to their users?
Good question. Really, really good question. I'm not exactly sure how what you mean by that, but I would try to start with internal experts that know the customer and see if you can find those people from there. That would be my start. You just got to like pick the problem apart, peel the onion back, and get closer and closer. I have worked at a couple of companies where the user was quite protected, and so perhaps this might be helpful. And what we ended up finding is by having us do a little bit of work with people we could contact and showing how successful that was, that gave us then permission to then go in and have direct access to the customer. If you never see the customer, you're a third-party vendor, then that's a really tough situation. You'll have to find it another way.
And
that's a good question.
Absolutely, and there's the other likelihood of changing expectation and changing behavior, and what to do with when the company changes on a constant base.
Yeah, that we deal with this all the time at Pluralsight. We believe that change is the normal. So I think it's a simple answer to that question is just the repetition and ensuring that your product teams or your engineers are doing constant discovery, because you'll see the changes in behavior as you're interviewing every single week. If you go a couple of weeks and you haven't had direct access to your customer, then that's like a warning sign or a flag that you're probably not as in touch.
Right, and then there's a final question on the first step, so implementing it. On HCD culture in a small company, what's the very first step? After waking up in the morning and having a cup of coffee.
Yeah, that's the funnest one. A small company is really easy. In my experience, the times I've been a part of a smaller company, you have a lot more direct access to everyone, and everyone is wearing a lot of hats. So the first step really is discovering what that core end vision, what's your North Star as a company. And that's gonna be the first thing that you'll figure out. You're not gonna have to worry too much about what your practices are internally, because those are very malleable. It's more just attacking what exactly is the problem we're solving, and then just go directly to the second step of getting that framework going. I've found it very beneficial even in a small company. The last project I was working on was a small startup of about 15 people. It was started with just 3. It was really helpful to have an established practice of discovery. It really paid dividends.
Brilliant. Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Big hand to Chris.